Coming up on ReFramed.
Along with this week's special guest, Angel Dixon. Today we'll be discussing Raising Dion.
This is what true disability is. This is it now.
No impairment or no experience of disability is the same.
Great character, really, stealing the show, as many people have said.
I did not see a ramp. How did this child get in this building?
Welcome back to ReFramed, the podcast that reframes how disability is portrayed in film and TV. I'm your host, Jason Climo, and today I have the very wonderful Stephanie Dow with me as my co-host, along with this week's special guest, Angel Dixon. Today we'll be discussing Raising Dion, but before we do, let's say hello to Angel and learn a bit more about her. So welcome to the podcast, Angel. Did you just want to start off by telling everyone a bit about you and what you do?
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here with my two favourite content creators.
Yay.
Happy that you finally were able to come on.
That's what happens when you have a baby.
Literally.
There's no time for anything. Yes, so, I guess that leads me to my intro. I am a mum. First and foremost, that's where I'm at the moment. I've stepped back from a lot of my work. Where I was at prior to that was I was lucky enough to be the CEO of Attitude Foundation and to work with the wonderfully passionate and incredibly intelligent and wonderful people there. And I am still an active board member and we get to do a lot of fun things there. I guess my personal history is I am a person with disability. I've spent the last decade or so kind of unraveling this phenomenon of disability. It started as kind of like a way to answer my own questions. And then I traveled the world and met a bunch of really interesting people and realized that the things that I was experiencing were also being experienced by an entire community of people. And I needed to figure out a way to solve that. So I would just work in random ways, seemingly random, but to me it makes sense, to create any kind of impact where I can. Obviously, I've found myself at Attitude Foundation because I feel that media is one of our most powerful tools for changing attitude, particularly in the age that we're in. I've done everything from modeling with Jason on fashion runways, to now I've done a deep dive into research, and I'm really hoping that that I can make some impact in that area.
You mentioned you're a new parent yourself. What kind of, or have you experienced any kind of attitudinal or accessibility barriers that have come with that along the way? I mean, parenthood's a big transition for anyone, but have you found anything more specific to your situation?
It was really interesting when I was first pregnant. I was actually really concerned. So my impairment is static. I really don't have to interact with medical environments terribly often. I prepared myself for the fact that I was going to have to do that when I was pregnant. And unfortunately, everything was still the same. So doctors either acknowledged too much disability and impairment, or they went the other way and they didn't acknowledge it at all. There was really no middle ground, to the point where actually when I went and I had my first blood test to find out that I was pregnant, I had to go to a new GP, and I sat down literally just to get the results of my blood test. Like, they knew that I was there for that, and they looked at my arm and said, "What do you do for that? That's a problem that needs to be fixed." And I'm like, I'm just here to get my results. So that was...
Please, God, no. Not today.
So that was the start of my parenting journey.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, I feel that I was very lucky as far as I came into this world of parenting with my eyes wide open. I understood what was going to be the barriers for me, and I've been able to have a bit of a head start, I think. It still doesn't make it any easier. Certainly, I understood that when I was using my chair and I had a baby strapped to me, that was going to be considerably harder than when it's just me, like trying to get through the world. There's this wonderful thing called a lap baby that I have used that's been incredible. Certainly helps for when you're sitting eating dinner and a baby's got to, be on you, or you're just going for a wheel around the block. He's not going to fall out of my chair. But I found that all of the same barriers that existed for me before became an even bigger barrier for me with a baby. I was lucky enough to chat to some of our board members who are people with disability and who have had children before. Yeah. And that was really helpful in the lead up to preparing for this. There's someone who has an impairment that's very similar to mine. And so that was really reassuring going in.
That would be hard because I remember when I acquired my impairment, that first stage of isolation of nobody is understanding what I'm going through right now, and then you connect with your community and you realize actually a lot of people do, and you learn a lot about it and learn off wonderful people. I was lucky to learn from you. It'd be interesting, that must have been tricky to go back to sort of
it's
feeling. Yeah,
it's funny, and I guess it's kind of like what we talk about simulations, how they're not okay.
Yeah.
And sorry, I will explain simulation for people that are listening. So when we take a person who has typical mobility and we put them in a wheelchair, for example, to try and teach sensitivity or empathy or whatever it is we're trying to teach with that, it actually backfires. And I have seen this over and over and over again because I'm invited to speak at all these events where they do things like this. And I have seen people who have gone into experiencing no disability to instant disability, and I've seen them break down in front of me because they've got no coping skills.
Mm-hmm.
No one has prepared them for what they're about to experience. They then go home and they think, oh my God, I'm so glad that I'm not a person with disability. How horrible must that person's life be?
Yeah.
And it just perpetuates all the things that we don't need perpetuated.
Yes.
And so I guess coming into this, I feel that I am lucky for that reason, that I did have a bit of a heads up. But even for a person with disability, having to relive it, it has been challenging again. Yeah. And not from an impairment perspective, not from a diagnosis perspective. It's purely that disability that I experience when I hit barriers.
Yeah.
And parenting's already hard enough.
Isn't that the importance of representation? But it's, if you don't see, your own experience, but if something changes and you don't see that reflected out in society or on screen or something, you're kind of back to square one a little bit. You kind of what do I do with this? Even the other day, I very different, but I hurt my knee, and while I use a wheelchair, I still have to stand up and weight bear to be able to get dressed of a morning and things like that. And when I couldn't stand on my knee, I'm like, wait, what do I do now?
Now what?
This is what true disability is. This is it now. But that's it. It's the more different experiences we see out in the world around us, the more of a more well-rounded picture we have of our own experience and how we can maybe cope with things and deal with things. So
exactly. And I love the way you describe that it's no, I was fine before, this is disability. That's exactly how it feels. And I feel like that's such an internalized perspective, right? That's an internalized non-disabled perspective, because it's that's a very, I guess, function. And we all have that. And I feel like the biggest barrier for me was all the things that I'd internalized, like
Yeah,
the
right.
preparation that I put in to preparing for having a baby and the stress that came with that
Yeah.
could have just been halved at least, or just
Yeah.
gone back to a regular level.
Yeah.
If I'd have had, I don't know, even a website that I could go to and go, okay, one-handed parenting, let's do this.
Look like exactly.
Is this
You
a new
know what I
podcast
mean?
idea?
Maybe we'll talk about
Yes.
it later.
Yeah, cool.
And yes, there are some, there's like Eliza Hull, and there's a few great people out there who are making some really great content around this stuff. But we also don't need it to be like mums find it hard enough to shower on their own. I just wanted something easily consumable that was in front of me that I could go dot points. Oh, this is an excellent product. I will buy this.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also like you probably didn't feel like, oh, I'm just gonna, give, I'm just gonna hit Eliza up and be like, hey, can you give me all your
Exactly.
tips today? Because it's like she's also got a whole life going on.
Exactly. Like it's
got
just
shit to deal with. So yeah.
and I guess there's that whole point of diversity, right? No impairment or no experience of disability is the same. So then when I come to have a conversation with someone who has an experience, I can go, yeah, part of that relates to me, but not all of it. So I still need to go and do some research to try and find, those bits that will work for me. So the research is necessary. Anyway, we've got off topic, but
No,
yes, there were barriers.
I guess sort of touching on barriers, you were one of the first people to teach me about the social model of disability. And I feel like we probably haven't spent enough time on this podcast really like drilling home that point. So I wanted to hand to you to really drill it home for us, please.
Models are literally just a way to conceptualize what already exists. So we were seeing these things pop up, we documented them. This is just a way for us to measure them. It's a way to turn them more black and white. Social model is the closest thing that I feel we have to have the power to counter the really damaging and limiting perspectives we have on disability at the moment. Social model is in no way the end all be end all of everything. There are definitely gaps, but it's the closest thing we've got. We can move into things like inclusive design, universal design, and all those kinds of things that we can make work within a model. And that certainly comes into the social model of disability framework. And that's really where I sit as far as my work and what I guess believe will take us further on the journey to inclusion rather than backwards like all the other stuff. But I feel like what we've been trying to do with the models is turn something that is incredibly complex and nuanced into something that's not. At Attitude Foundation, what we tried to do when we were trying to create this podcast, what we were trying to do when we created our documentary series, was to try and blast everything open to try and create working environments. So within the confines of making media, not just what we're seeing on screen or what we're consuming, but behind the scenes, we wanted to blow open the way that people currently work on creating things, not media. We weren't, we were trying to conceptualize a new way of working because it's not black and white. There is no model that we can use to work from. We actually need to start using common sense and asking people how they want to work.
Yes.
So I'm not the right person to ask because I do have a very open mind when it comes to all of these things. I can't make these things black and white for anyone, even though they desperately want them to be.
That's the point that people need to take away from a lot of this is these things are not black and white. You can't be all of this or all of this. Like there needs to be that synergy between all of these models because we're not just like one thing, as a person. We're lots of many things going on. So I think for me that's a huge takeaway and kind of what we want to touch on more with representation in screen, in film, TV, all of the media. So I guess that brings us to usually our final question for you guys is why, what is it that representation does for audience members? Why do you think it's so important that we see more of these experiences and nuances on screen?
There is a existing issue that we have, not just in media, but within perceptions of disability, which is that it's either negative or positive. That's what contributes to this polarized understanding of disability. That's what contributes to certainly my own conceptualization of who I am and, what disability looks like in me. And it feels like this polar opposite thing going on, and you kind of go one or the other, and I'm sick of it. So I guess I'm for holistic representation and honest representation.
Yeah.
And this is a topic that comes up when we discuss the social model of disability a lot too, that disability can't always, and a lot of people with disability don't always want to, separate disability from themselves. And I'm one of those people. It's actually informed a lot of who I am, and I don't want to remove that. I actually feel like I'm a better person for it. I can certainly say that sometimes I wish I didn't have my impairment. Sometimes it would be easier because I live in a world that isn't made for me.
So we're ready to go and analyse Raising Dion. Steph, can you just give us the rundown?
So Raising Dion is a Netflix series that tells the story of a widowed mother and her young son, Dion, who around his 8th birthday learns that he has powers beyond anyone's comprehension. As they learn the origins of Dion's powers, his mother, Nicole, must work hard to keep Dion's powers a secret for fear of course, exploitation. One person that does learn of Dion's powers early on, however, is his self-appointed best friend, Esperanza, a young, sassy girl in Dion's class who happens to use a motorized wheelchair. So I think we know a little bit about your experience watching Raising Dion, Angel, but do you want to kick us off? What were your thoughts on the series?
The first season of Raising Dion, there's a lot that I'll say about it, but in those early episodes, Esperanza was experiencing disability. She was being left out. She was being an afterthought. You actually couldn't obviously see the accessibility features for her. She would just turn up on screen, and I'd go, I've literally just seen the stairs at the front of that school. I did not see a ramp. How did this child get in this building?
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at it. I'm going, this is horrible. I can't watch the rest of this. I'm not going to finish this series. And we experienced this during the making of our documentary series at Attitude Foundation. Because it was a documentary series, perspective shift on SBS. Because it was a documentary series, we had to show the early beginnings of people's stories, and a lot of those were really tough and were really hard, and we knew that people without disability were going to view those things a lot more negatively and in a very damaging way than what we were. And so trying to navigate that was really tough, particularly with a production agency who had a very kind of solid idea of where they wanted to go with a story arc and all that sort of stuff. But as people with disability, as board members, we're all going, no, like, pump the brakes. This is going to come off really badly, and we can't be perpetuating these things because people aren't going to see this as a series. They're going to see it as one episode. And if we don't resolve this there and then, they're going to walk away with an even more perpetuated idea of the existing things that are already in their brain.
Yep.
so as media makers, it's really challenging, and I don't know where I sit with this, but I feel like Raising Dion did it well.
I think that's the important thing. Like we're all learning. People with disabilities are learning. Filmmakers are learning. Society is learning slowly, but we're getting there. As you said, filmmakers, media makers, it's such a fine line. You don't want to, and I do this in my own work where we know what works on film. We've seen the tropes that, you know, have been done over and over again, and audiences are used to seeing that. And it is really hard because when you are creating something, you do sometimes find yourself just falling into that because that's what's been done, that's what you're used to seeing. But it's about checking yourself, and it's about making sure that you may be showing like the barriers and like some of the negative stuff because you don't want to ignore that that's real stuff, that's a real experience. But for me, I'm always like looking for the other side of the coin as well, the flip side, the okay, yeah, this is the negative experience, part of the experience, but where is the opposite, the positive, the beneficial side of the experience as well? Because disability, as you said yourself, like for me, I don't disability has brought so much to my life. It's given me incredible opportunities and experiences that I don't think I would have had otherwise. But with that, you get the barriers and the attitudinal barriers and all of that. So it's for me, it's about both sides of the coin, and I think that's the very, very fine line that filmmakers and media makers have to walk along nowadays. But it can be done. It can be done well, as you said.
Early on, I got the feeling that they were going to create some parallel between race and that of disability. I just had that kind of vibe. Don't ask me how, but I just did. And when they started using the word abilities, I was just cringing every time, even though it wasn't even around disability. It was just on the line of superhero stuff. But you kind of also got the vibe that they were drawing parallels there as well. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can get on board with this.
That's where I was like, oh, is this what this is about? Are we comparing
Yeah.
got like superhero powers with disability? Is this what
Are we doing the
doing?
Paralympic advertising all over again? Is that
And
what we're
you're like,
doing?
I'm getting the ick.
It's just there is something that you both need to know about me. In the very early stages of my activism, after spending a lot of time with some people in San Francisco, I referred to myself once as an abilities crusader.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
I feel like that's your superhero name right there.
It's part of the journey.
Also,
It's
just
the journey.
What does it even
I
mean?
cringe. I have no idea.
Wow. That's cool.
Anyway, moving, part of the journey. So I loved and I hated the realities that they showed of racism. I thought they did that brilliantly. They brought it in slowly, which is obviously the vibe that I was picking up on initially, and then they really brought it home with some very deep conversations around race and what life is like for a person of color. And I felt that I had personally never seen that on screen, not in that way before. And as a person, that isn't a person of color, it certainly it brought me along on the journey, and man, that hit me. Again, I'll talk about the fact that Esperanza just kept turning up in the apartment building and at school, and I couldn't actually visually see ramps or elevators.
It's funny. This part got me as well because, as you said before, like there were stairs at the school, and magically she's inside, but they didn't show how she got inside. And they even went to the like so far as to say, "Oh, she has a wheelchair van," or like she has a van that she's. But I don't know if it came later, but in the early season, you never saw her getting in and out of the car. You saw her in the car, but you never saw like the process of how her most likely very heavy wheelchair magically got inside the car. So it's just things like that. Yeah. How many times have we seen just magically wheelchairs appear on the
Yeah.
third floor of a walk up? Like, that doesn't happen. But
And then like the strange part is like one part that I really like love is that Esperanza's really good, or like at certain times really good at like advocating for herself and being like
Yeah.
so for
Yeah.
example, I love the part like in the early season, like early episodes of the first season where she's like, this fort isn't accessible, and then they fix it and it's accessible. And it's like so strange that it's like they've gone to that point, which is great and I love to see it, but it's like we've not actually seen the accessibility of the actual, I guess, set and show and like the world.
I think that goes back to that storytelling piece that Steph was talking about. I think it's people are in this phase at the moment of where we understand that we need different representation. We need to start working towards this more holistic approach. But we've still got to merge it somehow with existing understandings of how we put things on screen. And so things like establishing shots where you would see kids walking into a school up a flight of stairs, they just don't take that into consideration where they go, oh, actually, there's one kid here because apparently only one kid who uses a wheelchair goes to school. There's one kid here that we need to, include in this very basic, because it only needs to be basic. It just needs to be the same as what we would do in any other.
I have the best example of this. I don't know if either of you ever watched Virgin River on Netflix. Now, there is no mention of disability or anything in that show. However, one of the main locations of the show is this place called Jack's Bar. And the establishing shot used for this bar has a big ramp out the front to get in the front door. Now, no other mention of disability, but I look at that establishing shot, I'm like, oh, I could go to Jack's Bar.
I could go there.
And that's how simple it has to be.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be anything more than that.
I feel like there's like one like elephant in the room problematic part that like we're definitely going to spend some energy on, and I'm just going to bring it up, which is the part where Dion lifts Esperanza out of her chair.
Again, I don't know how this was perceived by a person without disability, but as a person with disability, a lot of the representation in this series is very covert or very subtle, which I like. I actually like that there are just some minor tweaks that they've made to an existing story, and it's made a huge difference. In this, there was no conversation about what Dion was about to do. It was all done in silence. And she was lifted out of her chair without her consent, hovering in the air, and then Dion started making her legs move. And so I'm going, oh my God, he's making her walk. No one said anything. And it wasn't really obvious that that was what was happening. I mean, I don't know if a person without disability would do that in the same way. I thought maybe it would just look like she was like kind of flailing to try and get down.
That's what I actually thought it was. Was he actually moving her legs as well?
Yeah, he was trying to make her walk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's, yeah.
And he actually said that. So then he brought her back down because she started saying, what are you doing? Like, get me down. He put her back in her chair. And then she said, what did you think you were doing? And he said, I wanted you to walk. If I was in a chair, I would want to fly. And that was sort of how the discussion went. And then she left. And I absolutely love that that's how they left it. I hate it and love it because I hate that it wasn't resolved in the moment, because who knows how people without disability were viewing that. And if they'd have turned it off at that point, who knows what they've, taken away. They haven't learned a lesson. But then they actually don't bring Esperanza back in for like another 2 or 3 episodes. They actually leave Dion to do the work, which I love, because so often as people with disability, we're left to be the people to guide everyone else. We're left to be. I have actually been on stage in a room full of people without disability at an event that was only talking about disability. And I've sat on stage and I've gone, I am tired. I don't want to have to keep being the person to teach you. That's not my job here. My job is to have conversations, yes, so we can start new understandings of disability, but actually sitting here and actually giving you black and white, here's what you do, here's what you don't do, is not what I feel my role should be. Because it's exhausting.
Yeah.
Because you have to do it over and over again, and things don't change that way. Anyway, I could talk about that a long time. And so I loved that Dion was left to do the work, and Dion felt terrible. He went and he spoke to his mum, he spoke to several people, and they weren't really deep conversations. They were things like, so someone actually said to him, how long have you known this girl? And you don't actually know, I didn't love the wording here, but you don't know why she's in the chair. As a resolution for people, we talk about people who use chairs because it's a tool. It's not part of us. And Dion actually said, I don't think of that as Esperanza. I just think of her as Esperanza. Like I don't. And I liked that. It was a subtle way of saying that he sees her, and he sees her with all of disability, not without. Because a lot of the time people will say, oh, I don't see the chair, or I don't see your cane, or I don't see, I just see you as a person. And that's like, it's like whitewashing. It's like when people say, I don't see color.
And it's like,
we're ignoring a fundamental part of us.
This is part of our identity, guys. Like, move forward.
Like
So I really did like that. And I liked the resolution. I liked that eventually Esperanza was ready to forgive, and they were able to move forward from it. And I actually have a note here where she didn't even need to say anything. Dion actually said, I know now that I didn't respect Esperanza's values. And all he said to her was, I'm sorry for fixing you when I know you aren't broken, for trying to fix you when I know you aren't broken. And that was it.
I think it was a really interesting way to show that that childlike innocence, and how I guess like the way disability is sort of talked about, like that, that people have to be fixed or cured or something like that. How that can, like this kid Dion is just seeing, Esperanza as his best friend, but the world is telling him that the wheelchair is an issue, that she needs to be fixed. And so he has this childlike innocence of like, that's how he interprets that information that he's getting from the world around him. And I know, I remember I had an experience of that when I was really probably Dion's age. And I remember a bunch of my friends heard about this operation that fixed arthritis or something like that. And they were like, oh, we're going to raise money and we're going to get you this operation or something. And it's like, actually no, that's like, and it's all well-meaning, and it's all, again, that childlike innocence, but I think you made a good point. Like, it's interesting how the show dealt with that and showed that Esperanza was she just left. She was angry at that moment. That was Dion disrespecting her, not asking consent, or any of that. Like, if she wanted to fly, like, she would have asked Dion, like, hey, you can make me fly, right? Let me fly.
Let's do it. I think that's a really great angle to view it. I hadn't seen it in that way. The actual experience reminded me of, I tell this story a lot. Jason, you would know this story. I was at Sydney Airport once, and I was using my chair, and a person was walking in the opposite direction to me, like in quite a hurry. And I remember seeing them because they were in a hurry, and I was like, oh, one person's in a hurry. And I just kind of kept going. And then all of a sudden, that same person was behind me pushing my chair. Because Steph, I can see handles on the back of your chair. I've had people who are always wheelchair users that say to me, just take the handles off your chair. And I'm like, yeah, but then I wouldn't be able to do anything. Like, sometimes I stand up and I need to push my chair.
And also, like, I shouldn't have to take handles off my chair so that
just so someone else
is not tempted to be like, I'm going to grab that. Like, just
not
no,
like there's a sign,
don't fucking grab
sign,
it.
There's no sign on it saying, please push. If you see no pushing. Like,
and so I said to them, what are you doing? And they were like, don't worry, I was going this way anyway. And I'm like, no, you weren't.
You literally weren't. Don't lie.
You've got this savior complex and I hate it, and go away. And
it makes them feel good.
I guess it made me giggle afterwards, because it's quite literally like picking someone up off their legs and running away with them.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. It's like, don't worry, I'm going this way anyway, and just carrying someone.
I'll carry you.
It's literally the Superman, like, like the old lady crossing the street. Don't worry, ma'am, I'll pick you up and carry you. Like,
yeah, it's like the cars can just wait. Like, I can just go at my own pace, or if I like want a hand or need a hand, I'll ask.
Or I can go really fast in my chair.
Yeah.
Like, if I wanted to go fast, I could.
Exactly.
I could go faster than you.
Literally.
Like, anyway.
Especially downhill.
Exactly. Anyway, it just made me thought of that experience.
I agree completely with that, like, analysis of that scene, though, or that whole experience. Because it's not just a scene, because it did kind of go over like 3 episodes. Because at the time I was like, holy fuck, what's happening? No. And then when I realized that Esperanza was like, put me the fuck down, this is not okay, and that she could then just go away and like be in her emotions, and I was like, okay, next episode she's going to come back. Like, I was expecting next episode she's going to come back and be like, this is why you can't do that. But she didn't have to do that, and she could just go and be in her feels about it and not have to like talk to Dion.
It's interesting though, because you didn't get the vibe that she was off in her own feels. You just got the vibe that she was like, that was really rude, I'm leaving. And that she didn't even think too much about it, which I loved. I was like,
But it was Dion that stayed on it. It was Dion that was, stewing on it and being curious about it and asking questions and doing the work, as you said, that so often people with disabilities have to do. So it was a nice flip. Yeah.
And I think, just like the really obvious thing that we always talk about is genuine casting. So it's great to see that Esperanza was played by an actual person with disability, which is good. And I've seen a lot as well talking about like Dion's own experiences of disability and how he learnt from Esperanza to like unpack ableism. And I don't know, is this too big of a can of worms to open up right now?
That's a big can of worms. I saw the same thing when I was doing a bit of research. They kept talking about obviously Esperanza, but then also Dion's experience of chronic asthma and ADHD, I think, as well. It's I'd love to know actually, because all that I saw in terms of like the authenticity behind the scenes was Esperanza being played by Sam Hannay. Authentic representation on screen. I'd like to know if there was writers behind the scene that brought that firsthand experience to the writing team, because I didn't see.
I was going to say, in my little researching, I couldn't find anything on like the writing team or like and even like a producer or director or anyone behind the scenes that was a person.
It's interesting. So I got the vibe. I've actually written that here in my notes. I got the vibe that there would have to be someone with disability or with a child with disability in the writers. I loved the way in season 1 that, I don't know if you noticed or if you got this vibe as well, but the Esperanza's character was really the only consistent, non-changing character in that series. Every other character seemed to learn something or grow in some way, but the change with Esperanza was everyone's perspective of her. So she always stayed the same. At the end, she was still this kind of like, I hate to use the word, but she was this really resilient character, who was consistent and who was kind of helping guide everyone else right up until the end. And nothing changed except our view of her and every other cast member's view of her, which is what we want out of life. So I found it actually really cool that they managed to do that in one season. As much as I didn't love the journey to getting there, when it was resolved, I could see why they did it. And then with season 2, I guess the thing that made me think that there was someone in the writing mix was that there was so much parent perspective. There was so much of even just subtle things with language about like powered people and what else was there?
So I'm going to
Like
jump in because I feel like possibly what's happening is that Sammy Haney, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. So the actress who plays Esperanza. I feel
Sammy,
like,
that's her name,
yes,
not
I
Hannah.
feel like her
Haney.
and her dad did a lot of like advocating for themselves, which is like,
okay.
I actually think is not great because like the interviews that I sort of read were, you know, they were talking about it in like a, you know, I guess positive way. But there were incidences, you know, moments where they were saying like, oh, it was really great on set when we realized that, you know, the van wasn't going to be great for Sammy, that they just went and got a new one. And I was like, yeah, but didn't they just
hadn't they thought
beforehand?
About that first?
Why did it get to a point where you were like, oh, hey guys, this van's not going to work, and 2 hours later you got a new one, which is like good, quick resolution, whatever. But like better than that is actually
not inclusive.
Yeah, because like you still have to advocate for yourself on set, and like Sammy's job was really to just go and be an actress rather than to actually advocate for herself.
Which is something that you and I know a little bit about, Jason.
And I think that's why I always notice stuff like that in interviews, and why I do a lot of research, because I'm like, oh my God, I'm tired of having to do this all the time, like on sets.
It's interesting that because in my research, Netflix like they put the call out for a young sassy girl in a wheelchair. So it's like, okay, well, you've made the point that you're going to include disability, you know, in this role. So where is the authenticity in terms of the writing for this character? Where is that coming from? What was the reasoning behind making this character use a wheelchair? Where was that going, kind of thing? What was the plan for that?
So I guess that's that brings me to talking about Attitude Foundation, because when we decided that we were going to try and blow whatever working on a set looked like open, then we came up with this values and inclusion document, or policy really, to try and help replicate whatever we put in place during the development of our series over and over again, because it needs to be documented somehow. That we need to create some kind of change within the way we work. And so I guess at Attitude, what we're trying to do is create accessible content. So meaning what we consume as the end result, that needs to be accessible to everyone. We've got to make sure that accessibility is there from the get-go, from behind the scenes. So we did things like, when we knew that we were going to have people who required quiet rooms, or, you know, any kind of accessibility feature, instead of us saying, what do you need, which we did anyway, because of course everyone has their own unique, you know, needs. The question that we always ask everyone is, what do you need to participate? And we ask that at the top of everything, but we certainly don't do that to ensure that we have the required accessibility options for them if they want to participate. So we always had screen readers, teleprompters. We always made sure that the set was accessible. We always made sure that there were all of these options, so that whoever we cast was able to get going as quickly as they could. And it was done in an inclusive way, because inclusion isn't accessibility, and accessibility isn't inclusion. Inclusion brings into it social barriers, inclusion brings into it financial capacity, it brings in everything. And so we need to make things inclusive, not just accessible, because accessibility can still be a barrier at times if it's not implemented in the right way.
Yeah.
So when I watched an interview with Sammy's family, and they were talking about ensuring accessibility behind the scenes, and that it did sound like a bit of an afterthought, I was like, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
This is a bit of a problem.
Okay, I think it's time for us to give our scores out of 5 on the inclusive disability representation scale for Raising Dion.
I haven't really thought about it.
Kick us off.
So I am giving Raising Dion a 4 out of 5. I'm taking off half a point for exactly what we talked about before, the lack of sort of, Esperanza just appearing randomly in places. Like, I want to see just, and again, super simple. It doesn't have to be the point of an episode, like just super simple, like background sort of stuff where you see her coming out of the school or the car or whatever. And the other thing was, obviously Netflix, good on them for like making this role, giving this role to a wheelchair user. That's awesome. But if you're going to do that, you have to put in the effort and the planning to actually make it accessible and inclusive throughout, and not be like, oh yeah, no, didn't think about that until you turned up on set, or oh wait, this is how characters would react to this and not this way. Oh, okay. Yeah, so just, got to put in the effort. So, but overall, authentic representation, great character, really, stealing the show, as many people have said. So yeah, 4 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, I was a 3.5, like literally for the exact same reasons. I think like one other positive thing I don't think we spent a lot of time talking about is I didn't feel like Esperanza's disability was like a plot tool in any way, which is often used when a disabled character...
I think it was.
Okay, possibly.
Yeah. The very last line Esperanza had in season 1, where she said, I know what it looks like when people don't see you. And she was completely used as, it was.
She did talk about herself being invisible a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
Again, self-appointed label, but
yes.
Well, so when you can break that down. So when Esperanza was talking about it herself, personally, in her own journey, that was fine, because that's personal representation. Like that's, But when it was used, almost weaponized in the final bit of season 1, I was like,
And then I think like the other thing I took points off was the whole like, really, she's the only disabled character? Like, is she the only person with disability at this whole school, or like in Dion's life? Like, are we? Is this all we're doing here? Okay, so yeah, for me it was 3.5 out of 5.
If Netflix is hearing this, I want you to know that I appreciate what you're doing and good job, well done. However, there needs to be significant room for improvement, because any kind of exclusion in any way is not okay. And so I want to do representation and then inclusion. So cool. Representation, let's give it a 4, because I think it was actually really good.
Yeah.
Inclusion of what we know, because we don't know a lot about behind the scenes, but we kind of get the vibe that there wasn't a lot of stuff going on. Yeah. I'm giving them a 2.
Yeah.
Okay. Because well done for listening to a family and actually having them participate in a way they felt comfortable. Go you. But man, there's room for improvement.
Shouldn't have been necessary at all.
So what does that average out to be? That's like a 3?
Yeah,
like a 3.
Yeah. Like a 3 out of 5. Okay, cool.
In the middle. It's in the middle too. See, that's comfy. Oh my God, too funny. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining along this week. And obviously, thank you, Angel, for your time. It's been absolutely amazing chatting to you. And thank you, Steph, as well, for being my wonderful co-host. we want to hear all your thoughts. So if you followed along and you have your own IDR score, or you have your own thoughts, or you feel like we've missed something in terms of how we analysed Raising Dion, we want you to jump on our social media. If you search Reframe Podcast or Podcast Reframed, we'll come up. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We also have an email account, so if you want to email us, you can definitely do that as well. It's hello@reframepodcast.com. And like I said, just let us know all your thoughts. And if you want to say hello to Angel, definitely jump on and say hello to Angel. And lastly, really just want to, before we sign off, say a big thank you to the Community Broadcasting Foundation as well for helping to fund this series. Other than that, I think that's all we've got for you this week, and we will see you again next week with another fabulous episode of ReFramed.